Greetings and welcome back. We are now continuing with our conversations regarding Lord Byron. I want to begin in your notes before we return to the Byronic poetry by talking about the Byronic Hero. And this is an important comment that must be made for your notes in the history of literature. The Byronic Hero. Now we know what an Odyssean hero, what a Homeric hero, what a Virgilian hero is. We know that, right? Virgil's Aeneid, Homer's Iliad, Odyssey. We know what those kind of heroes are, right? They possess those certain kinds of notable traits of what? Bravery, courage, strength, all those kinds of things, right? Now let's talk about a Byronic hero. A Byronic hero made popular by Lord Byron is going to be the anti-hero. This is going to be the character who is not always heroic in the traditional sense of the word. In fact, he will embrace the opposite of that. The Byronic hero becomes stereotypically what we think of as the 20th century hero. For those of you that ever watched a movie where you saw some artist who lives in a flat in New York City in the working district of the city, and he always wears t-shirts and smokes cigarettes and stays to himself isolated, and he paints stuff all day long and parties all night and all. That is a Byronic hero in the 20th century instantiation of the phrase. I think I might have said it to you already, that the great lead singer of the Doors, that really important band, that degenerate voice of the mid-70s, Jim Morrison, he carried with him in his back pocket a folded up old copy of the poetry of Lord Byron for most of his adult life. Now, why did he do that? Well, yeah, I mean, he liked the poetry of Byron, but it was more the life of Lord Byron. Byron is the first of our poets who basically gives a big up yours to the society norms of Europe. And he does. He says in almost every way, I will live my life totally differently. And then the product of his work will kind of be an important part of that. Many then other poets and writers will follow in the tradition. We think in the American tradition similarly of Whitman, who does some similar kinds of things, lives kind of a more non-traditional life. Okay, we are now going to turn back to the poetry of Lord Byron, and we'll look now at this other offering of his, When We Two Parted, on page 836. And let's point out something about the shift in falling in love. We already commented on this when we hit the Renaissance. The idea that a guy and a girl, of their own volition, choose to meet, to fall in love, to, if not get married, at least hook up, however you wish to think of it. All of that we kind of think of as fairly modern, postmodern, adolescent, post-adolescent behavior, all of that is relatively new in 1800 still. It's still considered kind of against the rules for a guy to go out and find a girl and to speak to the girl before he speaks to her father. And some of you were, kind of raised around this tradition that the guy has to come to the door and knock on the door of the girl and has to come into the room and introduce himself to the parents, and the father is cleaning his 12 gauge, and there's all these kinds of, the big brother is there playing the Laertes role to the Ophelia, where the big brother meets the, and all of that kind of stuff. That is a more older understanding of this idea of what it involves to quote unquote, there's different words for it, but court, C-O-U-R-T, is the old-fashioned word for it. If a guy, we use the word dating. You've probably heard your parents maybe use this word dating. So-and-so is dating. Do we even use that term anymore? Does anyone, do kids at Royal in high school use the term dating? So, see, this is already starting to become outmoded. I've had conversations with middle schoolers who are already telling me that word no longer applies. We don't talk about dating anymore. This is an old-fashioned word. And to use the word dating is an old-fashioned concept. The very idea of you belong to this one person exclusively while you are dating is maybe soon to be an outmoded concept. And who knows, at some point in 303 when I lecture it, I'll talk about back in the dark ages in 2013 when students talked about dating, but it's a very similar concept. Byron broke all the rules, and he celebrates breaking all the rules. So we're going to have a poem here about a liaison that he had with a woman that nobody really knew about. He had a lot of them, I told you already. And then it ended tragically, we call it, or we used to call it breaking up. I don't know what it's called anymore, but it used to be called breaking up, you know, that type of thing. Let's take a look at the poem, and we'll make some interesting observations at 2b about form. All right, let's take a look. When we two parted. When we two parted in silence and tears, half broken-hearted to sever for years, pale grew thy cheek and cold, colder thy kiss. Truly that hour foretold sorrows to this. The dew of the morning sunk chill on my brow. It felt like the warning of what I feel now. Thy vows are all broken, and light is thy fame. I hear thy name spoken and share in its shame. They name thee before me, a knell to my ear. A shudder comes o'er me, why wert thou so dear? They know not I knew thee, who knew thee too well. Long, long shall I rue thee, too deeply to tell. In secret we met, in silence I grieve, that thy heart could forget, thy spirit deceive. If I should meet thee after long years, how should I greet thee? With silence and tears. Let's point out right away something at 2b about form. What do you find interesting about the fact that this poem has such short lines?
It's supposed to accentuate the relationship.
Yeah, clearly it does, doesn't it? So, for example, notice the first line is actually, when we two parted in silence and tears. Do you see the comma there? That's the actual line, correct? I mean, if you were actually putting this kind of on paper, you would write it that way. When we two parted in silence and tears, comma, line break, you know, half broken-hearted to sever for years, comma. See what we're saying? Jot down in your notes at 2b, why do you think Byron is playing the game of breaking up the lines when he's talking about breaking up? Mr. Batson will say it's fairly self-evident once one says it like that. The subject matter, then, is in some ways linked or contiguous to the form of the poem. Byron is playing an intentional game, right? Notice the internal rhythms of the line. When we two parted in silence and tears, half broken-hearted to sever for years. There's nice rhythms going on. Byron is the king of this kind of rhythmic, lyrical poetry. But he's also going to make a point. Breaking up is hard to do, to quote a bad 70s song. Let's point out as well about form that you've got stanzas here. Did you notice it? So you've got 4 stanzas which will address different elements of, if you will, the breakup. Okay? Now, Byron is playing, like most romantics, in a game built by Shakespeare. We need to say this out loud. All of these romantic poets believed Shakespeare to be the greatest poet of all time. They loved Milton, don't get me wrong, but they all said it collectively that Shakespeare was the greatest poet. And when they used the word poet, they meant his plays as well. And if you'll think about it, Shakespeare's constantly playing the game of guys and girls breaking up, getting together, breaking up, heartbreak. Do you remember that when Romeo is banished from Verona, that he tells Friar Lawrence he's going to kill himself? Do you remember this? He actually says it. If I can't be with Juliet, I'm going to just take my own life. Of course, if you study it closely, Romeo's been with Juliet just a few minutes. Right? I mean, just a few minutes. He hasn't been with her very long. On stage, he's been with her virtually not at all. Correct? The amount of actual lines they've spoken between each other, not very much. What point is Shakespeare making? Well, guys are kind of... Remember what Polonius says about what he thinks is wrong with Hamlet? He thinks Hamlet is love mad. The Italians are the ones who prescribe this notion that guys can literally die from the lack of a girl they want. Maybe that's true still of Italian guys, I don't know. Maybe we should do a trip to Italy to find out, you see. But it seems to me that this is going to be something Byron's going to play a game with here. All right, let's take a look at it, what it is he has to say. When we two parted, notice in silence and tears, tells us right away the breakup was not congenial, to say the least. Half broken-hearted, to sever for years. So this is a poem that's now, is celebrating the right word? Okay, memorializing a breakup from years before, okay, when guys and girls do that thing. Pale grew thy cheek, and cold, colder thy kiss. Truly that hour foretold sorrows to this. Now, let's point out something. You can read this poem as a song about the death of the girl who died, right? But most readers of this poem don't see it that way because of the very final lines of the poem that seem to suggest at some point in the future there's altogether the possibility that they might meet again. What's hard about breaking up? What's hard about it? Why is it? Let's speak in rational, abstract moments now. What's hard about breaking up? So you got this, relationship. Everything's going great. We're all having fun. I don't suppose if you're Wordsworth, running through the fields of daffodils and all of that, you see. And everyone's writing and reading poetry, to follow Mr. Kelleher's lead on this one, right? Everyone's happy. And then all of a sudden, but does it end? Goes away. There's a decision made. Question from this poem. Who broke up with whom? Whose idea was it? Can you get any sense from this poem of whose idea it was for them to separate? Why do you say the girl? Because what, it's always Eve's fault?
It's always the girl's fault.
Always the girl's fault.
And he talks about how he's going to greet her later on with silence and tears, means that she probably broke up with him.
How do you know that? What's the one word in this poem that kind of gestures that you kind of say, yeah, it might have been her fault. At least, let's say it out.
Ruthie.
Ruthie, keep going. The D word gets used, uh-oh. What word am I talking about? The deceive word gets used. She is the deceiver. Why is she the deceiver? Deceived in what way? See, some of you will start looking at this poem closer and say, in secret we met. No one knows. None of his friends know. To this day, there's still debate about who this poem really is about. If it in fact is Byron himself as the speaker, we always have to debate that, don't we? No one knows about this relationship. It was kept on the, what is the texting language? The DL, right? Okay, so as if 8th graders did not invent that concept of, okay, we're going to like each other, but no one is going to know. Is that possible at Worland High School? No. People say no. Well, what I would say is that if it's happened and you don't know about it, then it was a success, and of course, then that's the whole idea. You see, be that as it may, notice in secret we met, in silence I grieve, that thy heart could forget, thy spirit deceive. Uh-oh. Who's he blamed this whole thing on? Is it always the girl's fault?
No, that's just what guys think.
Do you think at Worland High School guys break up more with girls or girls break up more with guys? How many of you say it's guys break up with girls more? I mean, you guys are now experts at this.
Girls break up with guys, but it's usually their fault.
Girls break up with guys more at Worland High School, but it's the guy's fault. In other words, Byron got what he deserves. Do you get any sense that Byron knows he's the one responsible in this poem? Do you have any sense of that from this poem? That the end of the relationship was actually his fault. He says, why wert thou so dear? What do you find interesting about that question that he asks? It's almost as if he's asking, why didn't I know? So you can start to finish the line, right? When we were together, why didn't I know how valuable she was to me? Keep going. They know not I knew thee, who knew thee too well. Dash. Long, long shall I rue thee, too deeply to tell. The word rue, of course, is an interesting word. Deep sadness. What do you make of these lines? Anyone want to take a stab at this? What do you think, Mr. Kelleher, is going on here? Can you construct or deconstruct what you think maybe went down between these two? Can you speculate? What does it mean to say that he knew her too well? What does that even mean? If a guy says that he knows the girl too well, what does...
Maybe he knew that she was lying.
Ooh. Which is to say, he discovered her deception and therefore had to end it. Who deceives more, do you think, guys or girls at Worland High School? Who are more the deceivers and who are more the honest, guys or girls? No one wants to weigh in? What do you think, Klingler?
I think both are equal.
Equal?
Guys are more open with it, and girls like to pretend like they're not.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. So you're saying guys at Worland High School are more players than girls are, or guys are more willing to show it and girls are not?
Guys don't care. They'll just show it to anybody.
Guys
like,
don't
oh, no,
care.
do
Do you think it's true that in the end, breakups are harder on girls or on guys? Who's it harder on, do you think? Guys or girls? How many of you say, it's way harder on girls? Breaking up is way harder on girls than it is on guys. What does this poem seem to suggest about breaking up? Who it's harder on? What does this poem seem to suggest it's harder on? Right. How do you know that it's the guy? We got no poem from her, right? We got no, whoa, 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 back that choo-choo train right up. There ain't no deception on this side. That was all about you messing around, right? We don't have any poem by her. Do you think it's possible that in the end, guys are actually more connected to the loss than girls are? And if so, why? Is it about competition? Byron lost. He's not good at losing. I told you, he didn't even like losing a foot race. And so he worked really hard so that even though he's physically challenged, he could win. Do you think it's about winning and losing more for guys than it is for girls? What do you think, Miss Anderson? Is it more about winning, losing for the guy? Because it's competition. I got to win. Byron clearly is mad he lost. Why does it matter so much to guys, do you think? Because they're like, what, more competitive, do you think?
I can't read guys' minds.
Oh! Now this is interesting. It's a fair comment. How can a girl ever really know what a guy thinks about breaking up? Question, can you tell from a guy's body language? No, Batson says no. Why? Guys are better actors than girls?
Well, there's a stereotype
A stereotype of what?
of apathy.
Guys have got to pretend like it doesn't matter to them. Do you have a sense Byron is pretty good at this? He was able to fool the people closest to him. They never knew. Who's better at keeping secrets in regards to relationships, guys or girls?
Guys.
Guys are better. Why?
Girls have to tell everybody.
Girls have to tell. Girls have to tell. Miss Sen says, I don't think so. That all depends on the girl, Miss Sen says. Do you think guys are actually more blabbermouths than they want to appear to be?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So guys are talkers as well. Do you think Byron is a kind of crybaby here in this poem?
A little bit, yeah.
Notice the final lines. He says, if I should meet thee after long years, how should I greet thee with silence and tears? Whoa, what's that tell you? It tells you, yeah, it tells you that this guy who's had lots and lots of, for lack of a better phrase, conquests, this guy is hurt by the loss. Do you think he's really hurt? Or is it more that he lost? It's not about the girl, it's about the losing of the girl.
Or maybe he just wants to get more girls. Oh, look at
Schreiber
me,
just
I'm
laughed.
sympathetic.
So that is to say, this is a poem that shows Byron's soft side, and girls love a guy who has a soft side. Is that what you're saying? Really? Seriously?
Well played, Byron.
Well played, Byron. Miss Katie just laughed. Seriously? All right, let's keep going. I want to be now with you on 838. This is Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. I should point out, first of all, we're going to start at 2B on this one. And we're going to use a word that we will come back to several times in the Romantic tradition, and it is that word right there on 838. Do you see it? Apostrophe to the ocean. Do you see that? You want to write down at 2B that apostrophe thing. Now, we know in punctuation what an apostrophe is, right? But this is differenter. In poetics, an apostrophe is what? Does anyone know? Does anyone know what this is? He says apostrophe to the ocean. Does anyone know what that means? Let's give a quick definition. We're going to see this a lot in Romanticism. An apostrophe is when you speak to an inanimate object as if the inanimate object can understand you. So, for example, if I were to write a poem called An Apostrophe to Ruthie's Tree out there, what would I be doing in the poem? I'd be speaking directly to Ruthie's tree as if Ruthie's tree understood me. Now, of course, this is a game poet's play. It's not like Ruthie's tree can understand me, or I assume such, right? And yet I'm going to pretend like that the tree understands what I'm saying. Notice in this poem, this is going to be an apostrophe, and one of the great ones, to the ocean. Now we know Byron loved the ocean, okay? And he spent a lot of time swimming as a way to stay physically in shape, but he also just loved the ocean. Let's point out though, and it was at this point I always kind of knew I would come back to these lines, the sea that bears her bosom to the moon, the winds that will be howling at all hours and are gathered now like sleeping flowers. Those lines come from what poem, do you remember? The world is too much with us late and soon. Who wrote that line? Wordsworth, remember, that's Wordsworth, correct? So let's point out something about these poets. They live on a rock that we call England, which you can drive across east-west in just a matter of a few hours. The entire area is circled by water, and it influences much of the life of these poets. So, for example, most English people, if they want to kind of get away for the day, they take a drive to the seaside. They go down to the ocean, okay? All the way around England. You can do this relatively easily. So, whereas, for example, if you grow up out here, a lot of your poetry is inspired by what? The Badlands, the desert, the mountains, the trees, the forest. If you're writing and you're in England, a lot of your poetry is inspired by the ocean. And some of you will begin to identify the different ways. Oh yeah, I guess it's true. Oceans and the sea has played a prominent role. Here, it will play as well. Let's go ahead and look at this famous apostrophe. By the way, we should point out, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage is actually a much longer poem than this. These are just some of the more important lines. There is, are you ready? There is a pleasure in the pathless woods. There is a rapture on the lonely shore. There is society where none intrudes by the deep sea and music in its roar. I love not man the least, but nature more. From these our interviews in which I steal from all I may or have been before to mingle with the universe and feel what I can ne'er express, yet cannot all conceal. Roll on, thou deep and dark blue ocean, roll. 10,000 fleets sweep over thee in vain. Man marks the earth with ruin. His control stops with the shore. Upon the watery plain the wrecks are all thy deed. Nor doth thou remain a shadow of man's ravage save his own. When for a moment like a drop of rain he sinks into thy depths with bubbling groan, without a grave, unknelled, uncoffined, and unknown. Lots and lots of people die from shipwreck, right? His steps are not upon thy paths, thy fields are not a spoil for him. Ironically, Byron will say, no human being can ever destroy the ocean. Unfortunately, by the 21st century, we know otherwise, don't we? That in fact it can happen. Thou dost arise and shake him from thee, the vile strength he wields. For earth's destruction thou dost all despise, spurning him from thy bosom to the skies, and sendest him shivering in thy playful spray, and howling to his gods, where haply lies his petty hope in some near port or bay, and dashest him again on earth. There let him lay. The armaments which thunder strike the walls of rock-built cities, bidding nations quake and monarchs tremble in their capitals, the oak leviathans whose huge ribs make their clay creator the vain title take of Lord of thee and arbiter of war. These are thy toys. And as the snowy flake, they melt into thy yeast of waves which mar alike the armada's pride or spoils of Trafalgar. Thy shores are empires changed in all save thee. Assyria, Greece, Rome, Carthage, what are they? Thy waters washed them power while they were free, and many a tyrant since. Their shores obey the stranger, slave or savage. Their decay has dried up realms to deserts. Not so thou, unchangeable save to thy wild waves play. Time writes no wrinkle on thine azure brow, such as creation's dawn beheld thou rollest now. Thou glorious mirror, where the Almighty's form, notice the word form for the for the Platonists in the house, glasses itself in tempests in all time, calm or convulsed in breeze or gale or storm, icing the pole of the torrid clime, dark heaving, boundless, endless and sublime, the image of eternity. The throne of the invisible, even from out thy slime, the monsters of the deep are made. Each zone obeys thee, thou goest forth, dread, fathomless alone. And I have loved thee, ocean, and my joy of youthful sports was on thy breast to be born, like the bubbles onward. From a boy I wantoned with thy breakers, they to me were a delight, and if the freshening sea made them a terror, it was a pleasing fear. For I was, as it were, a child of thee, entrusted to thy billows far and near, and laid my hand upon thy mane, as I do here. Notice the near sexual language of the final stanza. He says he made love as a child to the ocean. He learned how to make love by swimming in the ocean, playing in the waves and the like. Notice his attempt to try to make something really important out of something so simple as the ocean. He will even call it the mirror of eternity. If you want to know what eternity looks like, think about it in terms of the ocean, he says. For the expanse of the water, for the depth, of course, of the ocean itself, all things living, of course, etc., etc. So we're working with pure romanticism here when he says, finally, that the ocean shows men and women, humans, just how insignificant we truly are by virtue of the fact that we'll never be able to completely conquer the ocean. Everything else we might conquer, but not the ocean. Well, there you go. An introduction to Lord Byron and the Byronic Hero.